Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the next panel discussion of the day on attracting and retaining the right talent for remote teams. For this fabulous, very important topic, I would like to invite Ms. Marilyn Zakur, the CEO and founder for Cosmic Centaurs, who will be the moderator for today. In this particular session, we will have Mr. Damien Brown, the Group Head of Talent Acquisition from Shalhoub Group, Ms. Hannah Nordell, the Chief People Officer of Talabat, Ms. Hessa Al-Ghurair, the Senior Director, Human Capital, General Civil Aviation Authority, along with, of course, the moderator, Marilyn. So over to you, Marilyn. Won't take a lot of your time. All of you have a fabulous session. I'm right here if you need me for anything.
Thank you, Mitsu. Of course, we're all here today to explore remote work in the UAE and the region. And this panel in specific will focus on HR and talent management strategies and how they've evolved over the last 12 months. Before COVID-19, the UAE had one of the lowest remote work participation rates in the world, just under 10%. And fast forward to now, we're seeing these numbers multiplied by 5, reaching 61% in Dubai. And underpinning all of this is the recruitment and onboarding of talent remotely. I'll be talking to our great panelists about how they hire in distributed settings, the skills they believe are the most essential to leading remote teams, and the role that technology played as a facilitator of productivity and collaboration. Welcome to all three of you. I'll start with a question for Hessa. Hessa, how has your recruitment strategy changed over the last 12 months? And how likely are you today to maintain remote hiring in your long-term strategy?
Hi, hello everyone. Well, to answer your question, I think we all know that most of the companies have adopted flexible and remote working styles and agile working principles. Everything have changed, starting from recruitment strategy to talent. Even exit have actually changed based on the changes that actually forced all of us finally to work remotely. I would say, especially, I would say for us, it was never there that we work remotely for such a long time. So keeping in mind that before the pandemic, we had like in the world what's called so-called like rigid organization structure, they're no longer there. Companies are okay to adapt to the new change, like the good way of working or the new way of working. And that's what impacted everything, the employee journey to the organization, the way we develop them, and the way even how they exit the organization. Now, going back to your question, they've actually looked at something called liquid workforce or agile workforce. And each organization or industry came up with a different terminology based on their needs. And in a nutshell, what is it exactly? It's being open to have a blend of transactional permanent employees, non-permanent employees, freelancers as well. I would say contractors, a part of it, and probably part-time students as well, part of that whole journey. Keeping in mind the whole artificial intelligence part of it, the digital, the next generation, robotics, it's a blend of everything now, and this is what we call it liquid workforce, for example. But the question would arise at how do I ensure that all of them are aligned, being a permanent employee or a contractor or a freelancer? How can I ensure that they are all engaged at the long run? I think that is the question now. How can I keep them all and ensure that they have the same benefit at the long run as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Hessa. Actually, to your point, the statistic from the World Economic Forum shows us that there's been almost a 200% increase in recruiting freelancer in the digital sector in the UAE in 2020. Damien, I wonder, would you like to speak to us a little bit about how your recruitment strategy has evolved this year?
Sure. I think we, for us, it's taken on a view of looking at countries and people being based in countries which has never really been an option before for Shalhoub Group. We always had people located in our offices. We would offshore some work to our lower cost locations. So we have around about 500 people in India and several hundred people in Egypt and in Jordan. However, this year, in the last year, due to COVID, we've started looking at Thailand for our tech and data team. And other areas where we didn't have a physical presence previously. And it's now become more and more part of our recruitment strategies to engage talent wherever they are, rather than expecting them to move. And it's interesting you referenced the World Economic Forum results. I think there was one just this week talking about the reluctance of people to relocate now. And I think it was around about 65% of people were open to country relocation 5 years ago, and that's dropped to below 50% now. So, we can see a definite change in the attitude of job seekers towards moving elsewhere in the world, and we have to change our strategy to suit that.
Yeah, absolutely. Hessa also mentioned earlier how important it is to not only adapt to these new work models and then be able to find talent where it's relevant, but to also be able to create the right strategies to maintain the engagement level. We know from research by Gallup that highly engaged teams deliver 21% greater profitability compared to teams who don't exhibit that engaged behavior. Hannah, I wonder if you could speak to us about how you're managing your approach to onboarding and engaging employees remotely.
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, I fully agree with what both Hessa and Damien mentioned. When it came to our overall strategy in terms of how we attract the talent, that would be the beginning. And then how do we then make sure that we give them the best experience possible? What we faced mainly in terms of the attraction piece is we're a tech company and we're an online service provider for food and groceries, which really heightened during the pandemic. So we continue to scale from that perspective. So for us, we had to continue in the direction of full-time contracts, but at the same time also finding the resistance of international talent not wanting to relocate. So what one thing was attracting talent, first of all, from the big players, your big tech companies, Google, Netflix, etc. But then with the added complication then of them also going remote first, and us as a company that is operating in the Middle East, where remote first was quite unusual and not knowing whether it was sustainable enough long term, that we had to then try and see if they would relocate. So we actually took an approach where we said short term, 6 months, operate from your home country. And then we look into the relocation piece. So I think for us, we're still not 100% sure whether it is sustainable long term. And I think even some of the big players internationally are now looking at that remote first setup and whether it is working or not, specifically when it comes to an engagement perspective. So given that, we obviously then needed to onboard people based all over the world, as many others did. So we completely shifted our onboarding program. What we did was for people that were locally recruited, we wanted to give them a personal experience like they would here in the office. So we made sure that their laptops and their onboarding kits were delivered personally to them by one of our heroes, one of our riders who were out there on the front line, supporting our customers and our business hugely. And it was just a really nice initiative because they could also then connect to the rider at the same time and really feel part of the company. And I think overall, what we also did was, and I truly believe that this is one of if there are positives to what happened over the past 12 months, is that I think we've learned that we don't have to do everything face to face. I think a lot of us in the past where, when it came to learning, engagement initiatives and onboarding, everything had to be in the office. We had people traveling all over the region. We've got 8 countries. So we had our trainers, our L&D teams, for example, shifting from country to country to deliver leadership programs. And we've now realized that it has a benefit, but at the same time, you can do things remotely. So we've completely shifted our onboarding program to having about 80% of it online, which is actually really nice. We connect all new joiners across 8 countries into one onboarding session. So they get to know each other, whereas before they may have only met the people in their own country. So I think that's a massive added benefit that we've been able to really evolve when it comes to the technology piece and connection. Also, when it comes to the engagement piece, I think the one thing that our people really appreciated during the pandemic was how close we got to them as a company, that we really did care. We did listen to everybody. We had monthly engagement surveys going out, just pulse checks, not 80 questions, but 5 or 6 questions just to see, how are you feeling? What do you need more of? What do you need less of? And actioning those points. We switched from monthly to weekly town halls where we were constantly in touch from a business perspective, but then also with some fun and lightheartedness there with each of our countries on a weekly basis. This is quite funny, but we did a lot of virtual engagement initiatives. So we created something called Talabat's Got Talent, where regionally each country went up against each other to see the biggest talents that we have. And in our final round, after 6 weeks, we had someone in Egypt who was a stand-up comedian. We had somebody out of Dubai who was an incredible singer, and they all came together and then voted on, on who was the winner. So I think there are so many things that we can do virtually, as long as we also find that check-in from a face-to-face as well. That if we can do that when it comes to obviously guidelines when it comes to safety.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute on the leadership side. Damien, I saw you unmute yourself for a second there, so I'm pretty sure you have something to add on this topic of how you engaged the teams, but also how you plan on doing it forward. I know there was like a sort of a big movement towards how you handle the crisis and make people feel safe and give them the right guidelines. But now that you're adopting a more hybrid model and more flexible model moving forward, I wonder if you could speak to how you're designing that engagement piece.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, it's I think to Hannah's point there, it's been all about communication. I think for every company, I think really over communicating, if anything, with your people to let them know that everything's okay, that the organization's okay, that their roles are secure. I think that was one of the first things we did when the lockdown started last April, was we communicated to our entire workforce that we wouldn't be taking any decisions on resizing the workforce for the next 3 months, so that everybody knew that they were safe when we were in this complete lockdown position. But then, from our perspective, it made us rethink everything. And part of this remote working for us was about how do we make the experience the same for onboarding, as Hannah said, but how do we make it sustainable? So we produced a 27-page playbook on remote working. We then integrated a bunch of training into the Shaloub University on what it meant to work remotely for both managers and for the team. So setting up boundaries, setting up the home office, being able to disconnect. Our CEO has told us he'd never had an office at home. He would come to the office at the weekend or evening if he had work to take care of. But home was home and work was work, and suddenly that was gone. So yeah, we really spent a lot of effort in terms of how do we help people cope with that? How do we help with that mechanism for dividing between what is work and what is home life? I think what's really helped us now is we gave everyone the option of, do you want to come back to the office? Do you want to stay remote? And it's different for every team. There's one team who come in 1 day a week and meet together, and the rest of the time they're remote. My team actually come in most days because they are still trying to meet candidates face to face all of the time. So they still come to the office nearly every day. And I think, that's probably the difficulty with remote working, is trying to feel that culture of the organization. And to Shaloub Group, culture is all important. It's probably the biggest reason why people come to us, is to really sort of engage with that culture. So the office is still, the home of the culture, and people to engage in the culture, they still want to come in and still want to engage with each other in the physical environment. So we've left it up to people to how they feel safe. We've just run a vaccination session in February and another one in March to vaccinate our people in the offices or in the stores where they're working, so that they feel physically safe. And then the final piece of the jigsaw has been sort of psychological safety. So we've just been investing in a program to actually create well-being first aiders or psychological first aiders in our organization, to be able to provide the support to people and to managers, because managers suddenly have become agony aunts for everybody, and giving them the support in terms of how to cope with that and how to cope with this new responsibility.
Yeah, speaking of new things we have to learn how to do really well, Hessa, I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about some of the gaps that you've identified in the skills that people need to have, and how you've been able to support your teams in acquiring these new skill sets as you're transitioning into more flexible and remote work.
Well, as you said, transition made us be aware of probably some of the gaps that we've missed because of the constant change that we actually went through in the industry. But pandemic allows us to look at things differently and look at those gaps. And one of it, and major one, is actually soft skills. And looking at it at all levels, not only at the senior leadership team, but across the organization. As you know, Deloitte has projected that soft skills intensive occupation will account for 2/3 of all jobs by 2030. So it says clearly what are the soft skills that are required and how important they are to keep adapting to the new changes. I don't think COVID-19 is first one nor the last, but for us it's an opportunity to learn how to get over something like this again and again much easier, and transit as well hit the ground running. So frankly speaking, the things we've been looking at and training our people on directly, as I was saying, across all levels, starting from emotional intelligence. That was key during the pandemic and the lockdown, resilience, flexibility, creativity. And again, not forgetting the complex problem solving. Again, my employees are not with me anymore. How can I manage the performance? And the question that kept, how can I reward them remotely? All of these questions that manager used to come up with and say, fine, now we're into this together. Let's think how can we ensure sustainability again and ensure that we are flexible when it comes to how to address each and every concern. But as a whole, I think continuous learning would be a key to be able to adapt for I don't know what future changes might come underway.
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing we know about the future is that it's unpredictable. So actually, I'll take a question from the audience here, which you quickly touched upon, Hessa, is how can organizations encourage their talents to move up or across departments in this time? And I think we often talk about the fact that when we're going for hybrid models where some people come to the office and others don't, or in different proportions, we risk having this dual class system, right? And the people who are in the office are more visible, and therefore they will tend to be those that, will get promoted more often. I wonder if any of you would like to contribute. Maybe Hessa, you can start, and then Hannah and Damien, you can add to that. How have you helped your leaders make sure that they estimate and they interact with people fairly?
I think I'll just give my thoughts here. We're used to see people in order to recognize their efforts, and that is a natural human being. This is how we are. We are used to see each other, to have coffee and then discuss big ideas and go and implement. And then I come back and share with you my wins as a manager, where you go and compliment and probably convey the message to the leadership team. Now, if I'm working remotely, how can I ensure that you still talk about my success stories? And I think it goes back to the line manager employee kind of, I believe, one-on-one meetings, and how the line manager is being trusted that at all scenarios, I will still talk about you. I'll still be proud about your achievement and speak about it, regardless where you are. It doesn't matter from where you operate. I mean, this is frankly my view, and this is how we've been operating here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Damon, I see you shaking your head. Would you like to contribute to this question?
No, it really resonates. I think, it's the phrase I think I've heard so often is, even though we're disconnected, we're more connected than ever. So I think, the managers who've really connected with their people and vice versa are probably the ones who've had the biggest wins out of the last 12 months, because they've really been able to identify more so who their talent is. I think it's been less about who shouts loudest, and now that managers are having to manage by objective instead of presenteeism, they're able to actually understand who's delivering rather than who's spending a lot of time in the office late at night.
Yeah, Hannah, following up on that question, I think, beyond that ability to connect with the teams that you manage and be able to fairly evaluate them and interact with them, I wonder if you could tell us, specifically for leaders and managers, what is the best advice that you give the leaders in your company around how they need to develop their leadership in this setting, where Damien mentioned this, if you're not, you could have been the tallest person in the room last year, but now that doesn't matter anymore, right? In fact, we know from some studies that women get interrupted less in virtual meetings because the physical presence of others doesn't matter as much. So what is the advice that you give your leaders and how they can adapt their leadership?
I think it's very similar to what Damien and Hessa just mentioned, because we all needed to become human. Some leaders are natural born leaders, and they are themselves. Others find it a little bit more challenging, right? And then they go through maybe a leadership program, or they read a book about leadership, and you put on a hat and you say, I'm a leader, and I'm at the front of my team and I'm steering everyone in the right direction, which is okay. But at the same time, I think that the pandemic really forced us into that human element of leadership. And what we really encouraged here was just be yourself. And let your team know that you're also vulnerable, that you are going through exactly the same thing as everybody else. You're a person at the end of the day. You're a mother, a father, you know, you're someone that may have had a tragedy within your own family, personal, whatever it might be. Everybody's going through the same thing. So it was really about connecting on that level with teams. And potentially back in the office, we may have had water cooler chats if we meet someone, you know, down the hall or something like that. But your meetings with your team were meetings, right? Whereas now the Zoom meetings virtually became informal coffee chats that maybe not all leaders actually had when they came with a checklist of what's pending for this week type of approach. So we also encouraged our teams to, or our leaders really to say, how are you feeling? Not the general, how are you? Great, thanks, let's carry on. How are you feeling? I've been feeling a bit like this for the past week. How are you feeling? Because I think the more examples you potentially give from your side, it opens up that safety aspect for your team to communicate back to you. And it's not an easy thing to do for a lot of people, but I really believe that that was the way that we've been able to keep our teams with that psychological safety of that it's okay not to be okay. And I believe that's extremely important. Also with the communication piece, I know that, I mean, it's repeated over and over, but at the same time, communication has been so key. And the biggest thing around it is if you're on a Zoom, put your video on. If you don't have your video on, you're just talking to another screen, you know? So the big question was, how do I connect to my team through a screen? I can't feel their emotions, I can't read their body language, etc. But, you know, with that video on, try as much as you can to connect and always make sure that you're the one kind of leading that as well. So, and I you know, we heard a lot of feedback from, and Damien, you mentioned it earlier, around that leaders were becoming sounding boards. You know, if you ask the question, not how are you feeling, some employees came back in terms of their well-being in general. It could have been physical, it could have been mental. So we wanted to also make sure that we prepared our employees, one, and also our leaders in terms of what is mental well-being. Why has nobody ever really spoken about this before? It's good to speak about it because it's really heightened throughout the pandemic. And we gave awareness sessions around how to identify various triggers of anxiety, depression, whatever it might be, so that people knew, and we had leaders in our organization talking about it to say, look, this is an okay conversation to have, and let's bring it out and be vulnerable towards that. So I think those were the main areas that we tried to encourage during this time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take a couple more questions from the audience. I know we're about 5 minutes left, and I think there's so many like juicy questions in there. Here's one. Have you increased the salary package for talent opting to work from home? Yes? No? It's a really tough one. We know what Facebook did, right? Facebook said, if you're going to move to a different state, we're going to cut your salary based on, you know, the price of living there. What's your approach to the salary grid? Maybe not necessarily for those who decided this year to work from home, because you still have to pay for rent. But is your approach that you pay the same amount for the same job, no matter where that person is? Or do you adapt to their actual geographical context? Damien, since you're unmuted, I'm going to invite you. I know you don't want to answer it, but I'm going to invite you.
Today, we pay people the same. I think the conversation has been, will that change in the future? Because if you're paying a car allowance or travel allowance to someone who isn't traveling, then that negates the whole purpose of the way that the package is structured. I think when we did the survey back in June, July, asking people how many days a week they felt they need to be in the office to fulfill their role, 40% of our respondents said 0 days per week. And it begged the question that, if you never need to come into the office, why are we employing you in the most high cost location in the world, or top 3? And so, if we repatriated you to your home country and you could still do the role from there, and we paid you an appropriate salary for that country, would you not be happy? So I think there was a bit of soul searching, and I think as an organization, as I say, we believe that the culture is built within our offices, within the physical environment. So we still do want people to come in and engage with that. However, as time goes forward, we do see the opportunity to have a lot of our talents working remotely. And one of my team, her partner lost his role last April, May in the pandemic. She wanted to relocate back to the UK to be closer to support network with her first newborn. And she came back and rejoined my team in September, and she's working remotely for me and is a hugely valuable member of the team, even though she's a 4-hour time difference and 6,000 miles away. And she's rewarded pretty much the same as the team are here locally. So, for me, the role has a value, and that person has a value in that role. So we haven't gone the next steps in terms of looking at how do we financially gain from it yet as an organization. That's not been on our agenda just now.
Sure thing. Another question, maybe Hessa, you can take this one. Especially, as the year went by, I think something we know from academic research, particularly with changes in work models, is that people are a lot more positive about them in the first 3 months, 6 months, and then they kind of drop after a year. A question from the audience as well is, have you been able to measure, they call it, the audience member calls it the happiness factor with your new work models, or what kind of feedback are you getting from your teams now that, the 1-year anniversary of the pandemic has come?
As a matter of fact, we just concluded a survey between the same lines, actually. It was more of a pulse survey, as was mentioned by Hannah earlier, and that was key during the pandemic, and we kept following up. And one of the findings is the staff actually missing coming back to office. And it seems having them back in the office made them more engaged and happier, especially at the level of exchanging ideas. And I don't know why, but it's the physical interaction, I believe, with people. Having that cup of coffee jointly made them happier than connecting remotely. So that was one key. And the other thing, they all wanted internet support, Wi-Fi, internet support, get us more. So that was one, and we're looking into it as well. How can we really support them? If this continues, how can we ensure that everyone got access at the same limit across the geographic? And we only operate in the UAE as far as our offices are present, and Canada as well. But majority of my employees are here. But and I think there were two main indicators that I can conclude with. They wanted to come back to office, and if they are at home, they wanted support with Wi-Fi and getting that job done.
Definitely. Thank you. I think Damien, mentioned we are going to have to revisit benefits at some point. Yeah. Hannah, one last question to wrap things up, perhaps, and this one around technology. So coming from a technology company, of course, technology is an essential enabler of these new work models. We could not have done this, without the internet or great tech. How has technology driven your organization's adoption of remote work models? Were you already prepared because you're a tech company? Was it just a simple transition? And perhaps also, what surprised you most being a tech company about your need for technology this year?
We were not ready, even though we're a tech company. We're relatively young from a people operations perspective. So we just introduced our new system last year, but no, we weren't ready. And to go from fully in-house to fully remote, Zoom was brand new when that got unblocked. We were like, wow, this is amazing. Now we can use this. How do we use it? What's the best way to use it? But we also use things like the Miro boards to be able to collaborate. You kind of like whiteboard, which is virtual, which is very, very helpful. But again, it takes upskilling, right? So it makes sure that people actually know how to use it. So what I've seen generally is people using different tools that they connect better with their own teams. So project management tools such as Monday, for example. Also we do instant communication through Slack. So we've been trying to cut out emails, because I think one of the things from the pandemic that we've learned with Zoom is we feel burnt out and overworked. It just never stops. You're at Zoom after Zoom after Zoom after Zoom, instead of walking from an office to, maybe getting in the car and driving to a client's office or something like that. So we also started to make sure that we're not just running so many 15-minute Zoom sessions just to catch up, just do an instant Slack message with 3 people and then get it over and done with. So yeah, just a couple of pointers there.
Asynchronous communication is definitely the way to go. So that brings us to the end of our panel. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and experiences. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else tuning in did too. Thanks to the audience for their questions. And of course, our appreciation for the Khalij Times team for hosting the summit. Wishing you all a wonderful week ahead.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you very much. And big thanks to Hannah, Damien, and Hessa. I enjoyed the presentation, the panel discussion very much. And there were a couple of questions that I was very keenly interested in knowing. I know a lot of other people too. So thank you very much for having this discussion. And thank you for giving us the time of your busy schedules and being a part of the Remote Workforce Summit. Thank you once again.
Thanks, everyone.